Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all getting ready for the Christmas season and you've got all of your stuff done. I certainly don't. I haven't had a really good running start yet. But either way, this morning we're going to be talking about the gambling addiction in America. Now, this is probably true in other parts of the world too, but we're just going to be talking about America this morning. And some of you may be questioning, why am I calling it an epidemic? Um, when I began studying, well, years ago, let me put it this way, the first indication that gambling had some physical reasons, physiological and metabolic reasons, was when a an article came out, some research thing, and who knows, it could have been 40 years ago. I mentioned it in Silent Takeover, where I talk about that when in fact, I know it was at least 30 years ago, that when they began, they had developed a new medication. They had linked Parkinson's to a dopamine inefficiency. You can have an inefficient, you'll hear them referred to as inefficient, malfunctioning, dysfunctional, all of these terms, but it simply means it's not, your dopamine system's not doing what it's supposed to do. So when they finally linked, oh, people with Parkinson's tend to have low functioning dopamine. And so they developed the medication that some of you will know as Ladopa. And it was simply to give the body uh, more dopamine and hopefully to regulate some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. But some unusual side effects started happening. Many of the people were already in assisted living facilities, and so there were quite a few dosages that were being prescribed in these assisted living facilities. And the staff and the doctors and the patients began to talk about changes they were seeing, but they didn't even think about it at the time it was associated with the medicine. For example, some old saints, as we'll call them, who did not typically use profanity or curse words, began, as they said, they referred to it as cussing like a sailor. So the children would be like, my mother would never say those words. What's happening to her? And then others, they began walking into some of these rooms, and male and female patients were looking at some sexually perverse and sexually explicit images on the television. And they were like, oh my word, my dad would never look at this stuff. My mother would never look at this. What is happening? But then they began to notice another thing, that when they took them out shopping, you know how you go through the door and the little ding 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 goes off if you have something you haven't paid for. These old people were being stopped, and they for stealing. Basically what we call kleptomania, where they couldn't resist taking something and trying to get away with it without paying. And so the nursing home, the assisted living people, the patients reporting this to the doctor, are all of these people losing their mind. But another one was gambling. Now, I think if you've heard me say this before, I usually add, I don't know what they're gambling on unless it was bingo. But as we were talking before the program began, you can gamble on almost anything. So they were developing a gambling habit here in the nursing homes. I think Renee mentioned before the program started about her son. She's a very bright, great son. That he was mentioning that some of his friends bet on everything, like how long on a break somebody's going to take on their break to go to the bathroom. This is what we are beginning to see and what is developing as a gambling epidemic. So let me see if I can get to sharing my screen. And let's
You
see.
actually are sharing your screen, and what we're seeing is American attitudes towards gaming.
Okay, well, we were already there, huh? Okay, American attitudes toward gaming. Now you're thinking right now, oh, she means those video games. No, that is a part of gaming. But this is what I wanted to talk to you about. This research, which is the American Gaming Association, which may be gonna, it may print less negative press than something that's not a gaming association. Research shows that more than half of all American adults, that's not just men, 57%, participated in some form of gambling in the past year. More than a quarter of adults gambled at a physical casino in the past year, while 21% placed a sports bet. Now, let me ask you this. There's only, I think, 7 or 8, maybe 10 states now where gambling uh, in the sports community is illegal. I know in Missouri it was voted in, I think it was last November or the November before then, that you could legally bet on games in Missouri, which means you can bet on whether the Chiefs are going to win or lose, and you can bet on the spread, the point spread. We've had a crazy year with the Chiefs this year, and I just hope that it has nothing to do with the gambling aspects that are now legal. Look at this. The record level of engagement with the gaming industry comes as 9 in 10 Americans find casino gambling to be acceptable for themselves or others, and 62% now find gambling to be personally acceptable. 134 million American adults, or 53% of the population, visited a casino for gambling or other entertainment purposes in the past 12 months, the highest level of casino visitation on record. Look at this graph. This is from 2011 to 2000 to 2025. So it's quite current. Do you see where we were in 2011? And even though supposedly gambling increased during COVID because the casinos were allowed to be open as necessary businesses, you see that it actually dropped here. And then it started going up crazy. So it doesn't show any drop. And compared to other entertainment options, consumers see casino gambling as innovative and high value entertainment spending. 89% of casino visitors considered the entertainment provided by casinos to be innovative, while 90% believe that casinos offer good value for money compared to other entertainment options. And you can kind of see the positive spin here on casinos. Now, I wanted to, before we go on, I hope I can find the one I'm looking for. Nope, that's not the one. Sorry, this one. Can you see this, Carol? How does alcohol affect dopamine levels? Now, the reason, can you see that, Carol?
Yes.
Okay, the reason that I'm going to go ahead um, and jump to this one is because what do we also associate with casinos? Not just the big buffet lines, um, but also with so much alcohol. So, what happens here? And we'll probably come back to this one in a minute because you see, there, if they're going to a casino or a place where there's gambling, they're not just getting one effect on their dopamine levels, but they're also going to have the what is called a buzz when they're drinking alcohol. In fact, dopamine production can increase with the first sip of alcohol, or even get this, just thinking about drinking because your brain has probably associated pleasure with alcohol. Alcohol increases dopamine production, so you feel good and generally relaxed. In order to keep the good feels going, your brain prompts you to continue drinking. Now, one of our major problems, and Deborah could tell you more about it, is on our Native American reservations. Many of them have huge casinos, and the communities are plagued. It's horrible what alcohol and gambling does to these dear people. It just shuts off their future. And children very young become alcoholics because it is so acceptable. Their parents give it to them. And so when you mix these two things together, alcohol and gambling at the casinos or in whatever, private homes or whatever, we have a recipe for disaster. So let's talk a little bit about dopamine and gambling. Now, dopamine, you've heard me talk about it before. It is a um, neurotransmitter that when something pleasurable, when you do something you enjoy, whether it's catching the football or ladies finding something on sale, especially at an extraordinarily cheap price, you get a boost of dopamine. You can get a huge boost of dopamine, but for a lot of people, it's done then. It doesn't continue when they get home and try it on, or maybe it does in gift giving. But people who acquire, whether it's at a giveaway, used clothing, or top shops, um, if those people buy a bunch of stuff, bring a lot of stuff in because they have a dopamine disorder, and they just sit it down in the house and leave it, and it becomes a house full of stuff, we call them hoarders. Hoarding is a dopamine imbalance. They're getting a boost of dopamine when they get whatever it is, but when they get back to the house and need to do something with that, they don't get any dopamine, so they don't. So, this was one of the most interesting things I found was the anticipatory dopamine response in addiction. And this was something that really unlocked a few things. A common neurobiological underpinning of gambling disorder and substance use disorder. So when we look at the highlights here, we see that dopamine's associated with it. It's dopamine is dysfunctional in gambling and drug addiction. But look at this. Reward anticipation does not require the use of drugs. The anticipation. Now this is very unusual thinking. Took some astute researchers to realize this. The anticipation that you're going to do something that could be rewarding or even could be risk taking can cause a boost of dopamine. So, what happens here is that when someone is thinking about gambling or thinking about going to a casino or just thinking about gambling on football, that person starts getting dopamine as they think about it. But the crazy thing that I found when I started reading this has to do with risk. The idea that they could lose is a risk-taking behavior that increases their dopamine. So, so with those of us who don't have a dopamine disorder, if if we did something where we were, let's say we're walking down the street, but at every corner we were losing money, we wouldn't walk down that street again. That's not true in gambling. When they are losing, they're even with the anticipation, I'm losing now, but I could win later. They're going to get dopamine, which just makes this even more of a serious addiction. The other thing is not just the anticipation, I'm losing now, but I could win later, but also the very risk of losing. Many people who gamble, especially in casinos or horse races or something, they plan to only gamble with their winnings. And so that gives them two, I mean, a double boost. It's the gambling itself, and then the fact that if they do make any money, they're going to gamble some more from the winnings, and that gives them even more dopamine. All right, let's see what else we've got here. No, we're not going to do this. I didn't have these lined up as well this morning because I still don't know how to do that. So this was, if you're going to be doing some research later, this is a good one to look at because he mentions from the get-go that it is a complex, intricate interplay of neural pathways and brain chemistry. It's not just wanting to do it, no more than it was with the Parkinson's patients. It's the body is driving you to seek rewards however you can get the rewards. And then the body is driving you to think about it. So when they talk about how advances in neuroscience have provided valuable insights into the underlying mechanisms of this addiction, that's exactly right. Years and years ago, there just wasn't information out there. When I first read this research article, I don't know how many years ago, I began looking for them, and they were not there. Um, if you look over here to the right, you're going to see they're encouraging betting right here on some of their threads that they were pulling up. Not because I was looking at them, but they were pulling them up because of the subject. So the role of the reward system, we've already talked about that. The dopamine, the chemical driver of addiction. Over time, second paragraph here, the brain's response to dopamine changes. Now you'll see this in a kid. What used to be a lot of fun, some game, let's say one of the games they use, for example, to just show how the brain adapts is tic-tac-toe. You can keep a little kid occupied for hours with tic-tac-toe. But as the kids get older, they want something more complex. But what they're really asking for is I need a game that causes me to make more dopamine because board games, all of these things have to do with winning and losing, which will determine your dopamine response. Now, neuroplasticity is a good definition here is the brain's ability to reorganize itself. Now, what happens here is habits become more deeply ingrained, but it also begins to cause a serious imbalance between your dopamine and your serotonin. And one of these articles that I have here will talk about dopamine and serotonin, how that they drive each other. It can drive the serotonin so high that the person can become psychotic. And that's why so many times you're seeing these people, and in our minds, they're sinking deeper and deeper into sin. What we're actually seeing is they're sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into neurotransmitter imbalances that doesn't just bind up the spirit, but it changes the soul, it changes the mind, the will, and the emotions. Uh, is this inherited? There is a genetic predisposition in gambling, but what you're actually inheriting is a body that does not do dopamine well. So if you're from a family where there is oh, this was one of the ones I was looking for you. If you're from a family where there are gambling addictions, the main thing you want to do is not start. It's like alcohol. You're not going to become addicted to alcohol if you never start. These are the states where it's illegal. And this list is getting smaller and smaller every year. Let's see what else I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, this was a very good research article here. The role of dopamine and its, you see that word dysfunction, as a consequence of oxidative stress. Now, I'm just wondering if you all, we'll talk about it in a little while, happen to know a nutraceutical that lowers oxidative stress. Because if you can lower oxidative stress, you can lower the body's craving for high dopamine. You can lower habitual use of anything, the lower your oxidative stress. So if your oxidative stress drops to that of a child and you've been struggling with gambling, you're probably just not going to be as driven as you were before to go gamble because you actually have less oxidative stress. Look at this little article here. The role of dopamine dysfunction as a, look at this word, consequence of oxidative stress is involved in health and disease, and therefore introduce new potential targets for the development of therapeutic interventions based on antioxidant compounds. Any of you know of any antioxidant compounds? The present review focuses on the therapeutic potential of antioxidant compounds as a coadjuvant treatment to conventional neurological disorders. So you can have fun. There's a lot of them down here that goes on and talks about um, serotonin. It talks about dopamine, the imbalance between the two. Let me go up here because I was down at the bottom for you. One of the most interesting things that I found out here during this time, just of studying, I knew that fatty acids were involved somehow with dopamine and serotonin and the production of neurotransmitters. The reason I knew it is because we tend to see significant improvement with children and people with ADD, ADHD, and autism when we put them on omega 3. It's just routine. We've been doing this for, goodness, 50 years, recommending omega 3. Uh, and it's more than just lowering omega 6. So let's look at here and what they're saying here. Evidence suggests that inadequate levels of omega 3, the polyunsaturated fatty acids in the brain, may represent a risk factor for these disorders. And they're mentioning Parkinson. They're mentioning dopamine disorders that we know for sure are involved with dopamine. They're also involved with serotonin, GABA, and everything. Um, so they're saying that these are such a major component of the membranes in our brain, and they're so important in brain development and function that in a baby in the womb, it might have such lasting consequences that it can't be corrected. I would say it can be because of the brain's neuroplasticity. It just takes a whole lot longer. So when you look down here, if you want to go through and read it, it's extremely interesting because it points out that the higher your oxidative 6, which you're going to find in processed foods, it stands to reason if you're eating out, unless it is advertised that they do not have certain omega 6 fatty acids in their food composition, then you can accept that it's there. It's cheaper, usually makes the food taste better, makes the food cook better, but the problem is it does not make your body nor your brain better. So this particular article, and it's a long one. I think it's like 70 something pages. But I was down here in the conclusion because um, I always recommend that you go to the conclusions so you can cheat a little bit and not have to read all of this stuff. I went too far here. Um, the imbalance between serotonin and dopamine are going together. They're being hand in hand even more. Now, why do I say that? We're seeing a very high level of serotonin. If you have low, in fact, Dr. McCullough, if any of you read him, he was actually discussing it this morning. If you have low serotonin, typically you would be diagnosed with some type of depression. However, they then began realizing that people who had extremely high serotonin were developing a very serious mental disorder that we call psychosis. These are the people that do all sorts of crazy things, like go shoot up people or kill people or go just really what we would most often call criminal behavior. Psychotic behavior is probably a better word. That they have very high serotonin. Well, why would they have such high serotonin in a blood test? And this is one of the reasons that some psychiatrists will say that neurotransmitter tests are not valid. You're going to make serotonin in your gut, but it is supposed to go immediately to the brain, and it's like since this is actually made of one tissue, it should be happening all the time. But making serotonin after you've made it, it stores in your platelets of all places. So if you have high platelets, you tend to have blood clots, right? Um, so that's why sometimes when they give people blood thinners or aspirin or something, the people will get better with mood disorders primarily because the serotonin that was being stored in the platelets is able to be released to be used where? In the body, but especially in the brain. And the higher that serotonin builds, the less effective the dopamine is. And the higher the dopamine builds, again, these are both made in the gut, the higher the dopamine is built in the gut, um, the more effect it's going to have to send the message we need more serotonin. And so it may very well be that what we're actually looking at is that one drives the other, that one completely sends the other one into chaos. Now, I had a bunch more of these up here and I seem to have lost them. But let's talk about what are some of the things you can do to help calm a dopamine addiction. One of the best things you can do, as well as irregular serotonin, is L-theanine, which we have in our very own Axio. It causes brain focus. And when it says sustained energy and focus without overstimulation, that overstimulation can be coming from gambling or substance abuse. Now, so Axio is a little tool in our toolkit for helping people. The most important product we have, though, for working with, let's see if I can get this one to come up. Come on, computer. The most important product that we have at LifeVantage, because some of you know that I've spent the past almost 16 years now working with these products and getting them to people. So if my field has been what it has been, learning and behavior problems counseling, as well as spiritual counseling, why would I spend this much time? It's because I believe the body plays a greater role than we think. So this is still the number one um, product in our little toolkit here because it reduces oxidative stress by an average of 40% in 30 days. Now, what I typically see is around 4 months, people will stop craving alcohol. They may still choose to drink, but they're not craving it like they were. They're not craving gambling. It's beginning to change their hormones. So many things are changing in their body. So if you have someone in your family or a friend, and if someone doesn't want to stop their gambling addiction, all I know to tell you to do is pray, because rarely will they stop if they have a dime left to bet, and then they'll go on and find it another way if they can, because they are so addicted to it. And I meant to point this one out to you while we're there before we go to questions and answers. And this is our trusted NAD. NAD, which increases in 24 hours, 100% increase in sirtuins. Um, it doesn't just improve mental focus and concentration, it supports positive mood and motivation. And all of these things go together to helping a person to overcome gambling. But these particular ingredients here have a way of working in the body that it can actually change your genetics. You see here it says potent activators that can make them higher, make them lower. So if you have someone, and I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened to my other ones that I had up here, but this is enough. Um, if you have someone that sincerely wants to quit gambling, I would recommend that before you even send them to Gamblers Anonymous or any of these addiction programs, that you try to correct first oxidative stress in their body, and that you encourage them to use Axio, especially. It's okay for it to become a crutch where they're like, I need something, and they choose an Axio instead. They're just going to feel better. You all know that. And then NAD, because of it working as well with the addiction pathways in the body. This is why I knew about NAD before a company got it. I was studying addiction, and it affects the addictive pathways in the body. So you're saying, yeah, Jackie, with drugs and alcohol, but gambling, yes, it's going to go to the same. It affects the neurotransmitter production. It also affects the certain regions in the brain, just like a physical addiction will. So, Carol, let's hop to questions and answers. And I want you all to tell me the things that you know that as well.